In this video, I'm going to discuss UV tiling in more detail. So far, we've discussed it in terms of the place 2D texture node and how you can determine how many times a texture appears across a surface. You have more control, though, so you can control not only the number of times the texture appears, but also its orientation. I'm going to demonstrate that by applying a texture to this NURBS can that I built as part of Chapter 4. And in fact, this is saved out in Chapter 4 as NURBS_can. So let's say I want to apply a texture to the side of this can. This would be a great place for a bitmap texture, so let's go ahead and do that. Go back to the hypershade. I'm going to make a new blend material. Assign it to just the side. Again, this is a NURBS surface. Assign it. And then open up that blend in the attribute editor and map its color. I've already prepared a map you can use. But first I'm going to go to the file texture, select that. And once I'm on the file texture, then I can go and search for that image. Click the Browse button beside image name and go search for it. Now I've already prepared one, like I said, and this is called t.jpg, and that's in the Chapter 8 folder. So I'll select T and open up that. And T features the word T across a tan background. So that's loaded up. I can go ahead and graph the network for that blend. And there's a file node with the T bitmap texture and the place 2D texture node. Go ahead and open up the attribute editor for the place 2D texture node. And there it is. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn on hardware texturing also so I can see that map inside the view panel. So smooth shade all is already turned on, and then I'll go down to hardware texturing. I'll move my camera around and take a look. And there's the word T. Now in fact, the word T is backwards. It's mirrored. Also, it kind of goes around the corner. So here's a place where you can use the 2D placement node to change the tiling to fix some of these problems. Now for a NURBS surface like this, you don't really do any UV preparation. In other words, you don't really change UV layout. So the solution in this case is either to go back and fix the bitmap or to change the tiling here on this node. This is a great quick solution. In fact, you can also do this for polygon surfaces. You can simply change a few of the attributes here for the place 2D texture node and solve problems like this. So the first thing we need to do is maybe flip this so it's not mirrored. So one trick is to go down to repeat UV, enter a negative value in one direction. So let's try -1 for U. And again, in this case, there's a U column and V column. So in fact, entering a -1 into the U cell for repeat UV flips it around so it's correct. Well, why is it incorrect in the first place? Because the texture is correct. When I brought in, the word T looked correct in terms of the texture swatch. Well, the reason is because the way the NURBS surface was built, the U direction runs opposite the way that would work for us with that particular bitmap. With the NURBS surface, U can run in one direction or the opposite direction, as V can run in one direction or the other. I could fix that as part of modeling. What I could do is go to that surface, go to the Surfaces menu set, go to Edit NURBS, and go down the reverse surface direction, and thereby reverse the way U is running. And when U is flipped, then the texture, which looked correct in the first place, would appear correct, because then U is running the correct direction. That's one solution. And then, of course, the other solution is simply to go to the UV tiling through the place 2D texture node. In fact, if you don't want to mess with the model at all, this is a great fix right there. It'll look fine in the render. So in any case, entering a -1 into the repeat U solved that problem with the words being the wrong direction. Now another thing to solve would be the fact that the word T wraps around the corner. Maybe I really only want the word T to be on one side. So what you can do there is change the offset. What offset does is it bumps the map, or it kind of moves the map, in either the U direction or V direction or both, to just simply offset it. So for example, I can enter a value into the U cell, like 0.1, a value less than 1, and that'll move that texture. So the entire texture is slid in one direction. In this case, it's slid by 0.1 in the U direction. Now because most of the texture is just tan, I don't really see an edge. It's just tan, so it doesn't really matter. So the entire map is slid in U. In this case, that's towards the left. And so in other words, T appears more on this one side of the tin can. Now it's still a little bit big. It's still kind of going towards the edge. So maybe I want to shrink this. You can also try to shrink the pattern by going back to repeat UV and entering a value that's either smaller or bigger. In fact, if you enter a value that's bigger, the texture repeats more than one time, and that, in effect, will shrink the word T. So what I can try to do is enter a value that's bigger than 1 into the U cell, like 1.2. So it's still negative, though, negative 1.2. And what that means is it's going to repeat more times in the U direction. And by repeating more times in the U direction, it's in fact shrunk how big the word T looks. Now again, because most of the texture is this tan, I'm not going to really see any kind of place where the texture starts and stops. Now, however, because I repeated the number of times it appears in the U direction, I need to go and fix my offset again. So I'm going to try, let's say 0.3 in the offset. And that does move it to the left. I moved it too much on the left. So let's try 0.2. Almost right. How about 0.25? All right, so 0.25 centers it up on the side. And because I changed the repeat UV, it doesn't overhang the edges so much. Now, here's a potential problem. Now, because I am repeating it more than one time, and I mess around with my offset, I potentially have a division line where that texture starts and stops, and I see the additional repeat, that 0.2 repeat, appear, and then all of a sudden end where that border is. Now, it happens to be here because this NURB surface has it so that particular surface starts and stops right here at this edge. Now, again, every NURB surface is basically a square, so that square starts here, wraps around the entire can, and ends right here. So that's where the repeat will be visible in terms of the start and stop. So that would be a definite issue. So that would be something you have to consider. In fact, if you go back to the file node and look at the swatch, you can see that because I'm set the repeat of 1.2, I get the texture one time, but I also get it 0.2 times over here. So if I wanted to scale it, one possibility would be to adjust the repeat UV value, but I have to be careful that, based on that repeat UV and my offset, I might get that weird repeat that appears at that seam. So let me just set it back to the -1, and then return the offset to 0.1. So -1 fixes the mirrored version of the T, and then 0.1 offsets it to get it back in the center of the side. Now, any further adjustment, I might need to go back to the actual map and go into Photoshop and maybe shrink the size of the text. But those are solutions you can try, however. And sometimes it's fun just to repeat something more than one time just for a special effect. Like, for instance, maybe I just want to set it to -2. If I set it to -2, I get the word T twice. And because it's set to a nice even number, I get the map 2 times in U direction, I don't see the word cut off. In fact, now I can try to change the offset to maybe move it over a little bit, try to get it centered up onto the sides. So I'm just going to try a few values until I get something that works. I also enter negative values in the offset to get it to go the opposite direction, so it moves in the opposite direction. All right, so there I have a repeat of -2. 2 is great because it repeats the texture 2 complete times. Negative again fixes the mirroring. And then I set the offset to -0.15, and that moved it over in such a way that I get the word T in the center of the long side of each side. And of course, the word looks smaller now because I'm repeating a total of 2 times. So that's actually a better solution than repeating it -1.2 times. Better to repeat it 2 times instead. Nice clean result. I don't have to worry about that edge seam because basically it's tan meeting tan, solid color meeting solid color, so there's no issue there right now. So it looks pretty good. Now we can talk about the other options here, which would be more stylistic in this case. Another thing you could do with the UV tiling is just the rotate UV. Rotate will actually rotate the map. And we'll look at the swatch here on the file icon so we can see what happens. If I change the rotate UV from 0 to a higher number, it rotates the map. Now if I return to a value of just 1 by 1 for repeat UV, the 0 offset, you can see it a little bit more clearly. So there it is at the start, the default state. Now I rotate the UVs, it's going to rotate around the center. Now again, because most of the map is tan, I'm not going to see any kind of weird edges on it. If you had a pattern that was more specific and had variations throughout the map, you'd see the edges where the map's being rotated. But you'll see that right away as you rotate. You can decide whether that works for you or not. So that's rotate UV. Another thing you do is insert noise into the map. Maybe the map's too clean, you want it to be more noisy and organic. You can do is enter small values into the noise UV to insert additional variation. Now, if you enter a big number, it's going to make the map really, really noisy. Let's say I entered 0.1, 0.1. What's done is added a randomness to the bitmap and create a really kind of organic, noisy texture. You don't have to go that high. You can go to a smaller value, like maybe 0.01, and get just a little bit of variation. If I go back to my view panel, I'll just render it out as is. You'll see that there's a noisy variation. Where it was a nice clean letter, it now has this wavy pattern in it, and that's courtesy of noise UV. Often it's nice to put in a really low noise value, like maybe 0.005, just to give your texture a little bit of variation. So there's, again, a little bit of waviness. I can go down to 0.001, make it even less. Re-render that. There you go, just a little tiny bit of variation there. Now you can do this for bitmaps or procedural textures, it's up to you. Again, enter a really low number in the noise UV for a very slight noisy variation, or a big number for extremely noisy variation. Okay, so those are a few things you can do with the UV tiling. You can have more custom numbers in the repeat UV cells. You can use your offset to slide the map one way or another. You can rotate your map, or make it noisy with noise UV.